this goes back to the Facebook days. We were in downtown Palo Alto and growing again like crazy, adding 50% headcount growth, 100% headcount growth every year. But downtown Palo Alto was not built for companies growing that quickly.
For parking garages for all those people, yeah.
There's just not enough parking permits that they could even process, let alone give us, right? There was a wait list. And so, Mark made the very engineering-driven, efficient choice to say, look, how much are these parking tickets? Are they? Hey, Mark, they're $25 a pop. He's like, well, we need engineers coding, and they're driving. Not everyone lives in walking distance to the office. So we're going to basically have a company policy that we will reimburse engineering tickets. Not engineering, anyone getting.
They are engineering tickets. They're just not.
To be fair, I've gotten my fair share too. I try not to.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast. Today, I am joined by Ed Park, CFO at Daffy, and this guy was the former head of FP&A at both Facebook and Asana. Ed's had a front row seat to hypergrowth, from budgeting for Facebook's explosive expansion in the pre-AWS era, we don't think about that often, to running the functions no one else wanted to at Asana. Yes, including 4 chefs that reported to him. And now he's helping Daffy rethink how a giving platform should be built and monetized. We're going to talk about what it was like bringing finance into the culture at a product-first Facebook, what was breaking most often during those early years, a lot, and the lessons Ed learned about prioritizing when everything felt urgent and important. At Asana, we'll dig into planning in episodes rather than quarters, spotting magic numbers like the 3 free user conversion point, and knowing when to shift from bottoms up to a more proactive sales motion. At Daffy, Ed flipped the traditional AUM model on its head with a flat membership fee. I love pricing and monetization discussions, and we'll explore how that one choice has shaped everything from product priorities to team culture. We'll also get into his glass half full approach to being a CFO, looking for ways to say yes instead of just being the no person, and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. So if you listen to this podcast, you'll know that I am incredibly passionate about the FP&A space because that's the route I went to get to CFO. And I want to tell you about a tool that has exploded over the past few years. It's called Aleph. And I remember getting outbounded by them about 2.5 years ago, and I actually took the bait because they claimed to be able to do a demo with my live data, with me right there on the call. And so I had to see it to believe it. And it was the founder running demos back then. Shout out Albert, hope you're listening. And he connected my NetSuite and built my P&L using their Excel add-in in like 15 minutes. And I was really impressed. Since then, Aleph has gone on to raise money from some of the top VCs out there, and they've built an impressive roster of customers. Many of their customers have been on the podcast, like the CFO at Turo, 8 Sleep, and Zapier. They're all really big champions and supporters of Aleph like me. But it's not just an Excel add-in. Aleph also allows finance teams to work with their live cross-system data using Google Sheets and their web app. And that's cool because it gives teams the option to support a wide range of needs and workflows like budgeting, forecasting, and variance analysis. And speaking of variance analysis, they're doing some really cool things with AI-powered variance analysis. It basically allows you to figure out what's going on and why, and it takes the time that you'd usually spend from hours to minutes. It's really cool. So I highly recommend checking them out and taking them up on that demo or trial, just like I did back in the day. And you can learn more and get started at getaleph.com/run. That is getaleph.com, aleph.com/run. Tell them CJ sent you. All right, I got to get up on my soapbox for a sec here. Everybody's talking about AI-powered this and automated that. But here's the thing about revenue recognition. It's not just about moving data around. It's about getting it right, full stop. So RightRev is laser focused on one thing, RevRec that auditors actually trust. See, there's a difference between automating revenue processes and automating revenue recognition correctly. RightRev was actually built by the godfather of RevRec, who understands ASC 606 compliance, audit controls, data validation, and the flexibility needed for complex B2B contracts. We're not trying to be your billing system or your ERP. We're the revenue recognition engine that sits between your contracts and your financials, making sure every dollar is recognized correctly, on time, every time. Companies like Snowflake and Logic Monitor don't just need fast revenue reporting, they need revenue reporting that's audit ready from day one. And that's honestly where RightRev shines. And what I love about RightRev is they're not out there trying to be everything to everyone and just slap some, AI slop on top of it. While everyone is building these massive platforms that do everything in a kind of mediocre fashion, RightRev does one thing exceptionally well. They make sure your revenue recognition is bulletproof. Ready to stop gambling with your RevRec? Visit RightRev.com to see how we make complex revenue simple. That's RightRev.com, where revenue recognition actually works. Most finance leaders still see travel as a cost center, something to manage, reduce, or delay until the numbers look better. But the Navan Business Travel Index, validated by NASDAQ, empowered by millions of corporate transactions captured through Navan's platform on how organizations are meeting and investing in face-to-face connections to fuel growth, tells a different story. Companies that are growing are moving. Business travel activity is up double digits year over year. International hotel spend is rising faster than domestic. Rideshare use is surging as teams compress more high-value meetings into fewer days. This isn't about perks. It's about pipeline, deal velocity, and customer retention. The CFOs winning right now aren't slashing travel, they're optimizing it. They know exactly where every dollar is going and the ROI it's delivering. The Navan BTI helps you see how your program stacks up against the market each quarter and where you might be leaving revenue on the table. Get the data. Spot the gaps. Turn your travel spend into a competitive edge. Download the latest Navan Business Travel Index today at navan.com/BTI. That's navan.com/BTI. And lead with the numbers that actually drive growth. Hey, Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, CJ. Good to be here.
So we're going to dig into Daffy, your CFO frameworks, and a lot more. But I actually want to start in the past a bit, because you were at Facebook during this absolutely crazy, bonkers, historical time, you could even call it. So give it to us. When you were there, what type of growth were you attempting to budget for? What was it like back then?
This was back in 2007. I had a chance to join when Facebook was about 300 employees, 30 million MAUs, if you can believe it, and $10 million of cash in the bank. I remember that pretty vividly. So I joined as the head of FP&A, and this was really my first startup experience. So it'll be a good topic for us to talk about with respect to all the mistakes and learnings I've had around budgeting and essentially just trying to keep up in sort of the definition of a high growth company. And what I learned over the 6 years during that time, I think was pretty useful and instructive for the rest of my career, which we'll see later in terms of understanding, I think, fundamentally what a strategic finance function can and should look like.
Ed, did you say there was 10 million in the bank when you joined?
Yeah, $10 million of cash. And sort of funny story here, if you can believe it, back then, there was AWS was pretty nascent. And so Facebook, to keep up with all this growing user growth, we had to be buying our own servers. So CapEx was incredibly expensive, right? We were building out our own hosting and locations, had to buy our own servers, and had to build up a team to rack those servers. And it was pretty clear we were going to run out of money. And the CFO who hired me at the time, Gideon, he looked at me and said, "Hey, I need you to do a cash roll forward, figure out we need to raise some financing." I'm like, "Great." And I looked at him like, "What's a cash roll forward?" And then he told me to go meet with the accounting team to go figure it out. And we were in QuickBooks still at the time. And so that led quickly to the Microsoft financing, the Series D, to help us literally finance the growth. And really, that was what financing was and finance looked like, was trying to understand what kind of investments we needed to make and how we could keep the capital in the bank to do that, to fund all this product innovation and user growth.
I just wanted to put that in perspective for people, because even Facebook was on QuickBooks if you take it all the way back.
Yeah, we were. Yeah, that was a huge undertaking shortly after we joined, because it was pretty clear we had already outgrown QuickBooks.
Totally.
And so, yeah, we moved straight to an Oracle implementation. Like a lot of Facebook growth, looking back, you sort of leapfrog the steps because the growth was so quickly. Like most companies now would probably graduate to something like a NetSuite. Right. And and I think you can get pretty far with NetSuite with scalability, but if once that reaches a certain point, you're probably going to look to something like an Oracle ERP. At least that's what the environment that I'm familiar with. But whereas with Facebook, we leapfrog straight to that because it just wouldn't make sense to take the interim step, even though that might have been cheaper and frankly faster to roll out. But those are the kind of investments we need to make at Facebook, is what I got used to, being highly uncomfortable, making huge investments, understanding the future growth, the existing growth that we had, and that really wasn't going to change anytime soon. And so you had to really kind of future-proof yourself, but that required a tremendous amount of, well, one, foresight, faith, and also just straight up capital to allow yourselves to do that.
Ed, I like how you say it was your first job at like a startup and you get thrown into these tasks that they ask you to, like, hey, can you do a cash roll forward model? You're like, oh shit, I've never done one of those before. Because I'm having like this flashback of like when I first joined my first startup and I came over from the private equity world, and they said, can you make a model that'll show like a sales rep that they're indifferent between selling a perpetual license and a cloud subscription? And I'm like, oh, what's a perpetual license? But like you have these moments where like you have these skill sets that you can apply them, but you're like, this is a completely different problem set than anything I've wrestled with.
Right. No, that's totally right. And, I think a lot of that is like everyone has to go through that learning process themselves, right? I mean, finance is this wheel that's been built, right, for, hundreds of years at companies. They've needed to make good financial decisions. And so once you realize everyone goes through that, and that just with like hard work and a couple of core fundamentals of like business partner relationship, using data to help inform your decisions, then that gets you comfortable. That's sort of your wheelhouse, especially for you coming from private equity. You're used to using numbers to tell a story. That's the same at FP&A. And as long as you're bringing people along for the journey and building that relationship, I think you can have this sort of back and forth dialogue, because I'm sure the first iteration of what you built wasn't the right one.
No,
but
not at all.
As you went back and forth with your business partner, you eventually got to a better place. But that relationship building process is actually going to be valuable for you to leverage for the next conversation, because business topics and complexity will grow, and it's not like it's very rare that in finance you do build one thing or you have one conversation and then that's the end of it, right? It's sort of this journey and this continued process to the extent that the business continues to grow.
I'm really glad, Ed, that you brought up business partnering and trying to figure out like what each department is all about and like what language to use with them, because Facebook is an engineering and product dominated company, like full stop. How did you make finance part of the culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that's one of those things where as I talk about it now, it'll look way more connected and like I had all this foresight. But of course, you sort of make the mistakes and you look back and you try to use hindsight, which I think is important. A funny story, though, I remember like the first couple of meetings I'd show up in, because my manager, the CFO, told me, hey, go to this meeting. And, generally it was going to be full of engineers. And like, you could tell that when they saw me come in, their body language just changed. Like, okay, the party's over. Oh boy, this guy's going to put a clamp on headcount. He's going to slow us down. He doesn't understand, anything that we're doing, which is generally right. But for me, I think, you sort of focus on the fundamentals of people. So really you have to build trust and embrace the unknown, I think, is to ultimately how you build that kind of relationship in a product-led company. And so embracing the unknown, I think finance people by nature, we're all have this conservative DNA, right? Which just makes sense, right? Just given our roles, and you like to know the answers. But at a company like Facebook that was growing so quick, that was impossible. That was impossible, right? And so you could arbitrarily put a high number, but you would probably end up going higher than that when it comes to user growth or anything like that. And then I think building trust, that just goes to sort of the personal skills, right? Like here, knowing that I'm not here to say no or to add friction to the process, but I'm really there to help understand what your problems are. And if I'm good at it, then if I understand that well enough, I can help solve them, right? So you're telling me like, oh my gosh, like I'm up. Literally, our tech ops team, led by Jonathan Heidegger, would be driving down to Santa Clara, where our data centers were, because the servers are catching fire, and the team is burning the midnight oil. I'm like, hey, look, I want to understand all of the different levels of how our infrastructure runs, so that when I meet with the user growth team, I can help understand and give you at least 6 months, 9 months, or even 3 months foresight into how you can build your team out. Now that's going to take some work. I need to meet with your team. I need to sit in your staff meetings. But as I begin to understand your guys' problems, I can help maybe solve them. And that takes a little faith from their side too. And ultimately, that's kind of how I just kept repeating that kind of philosophy, that hey, look, I think you have to be a finance person. You have to be courageous enough to sort of ask a lot of questions. And I think out of that curiosity, you'll start to build some set of knowledge, where, you're saying, enough, you learn enough to be dangerous. So I'll never be good as an engineer as what they do, or an engineering leader or a marketing leader. But if I learn enough of their problems and sit in their shoes or her shoes, then I'll start to ask the right kind of questions, maybe even start to understand what they're dealing with. And then I can apply the finance lens and framework to that and ultimately help solve their problems, so that when we're, discussing budgeting and going through, hey, why do you need to grow 40% headcount? Why do you need the CapEx to grow that much? You can anticipate a little bit of that, right? And so in finance, you kind of wear both. Eventually, I think the good state of finance, a good sign is if you feel really torn, like you're ambivalent, like, oh, I understand my business partner's problems, but I also understand there's just constraints around how fast we can grow and capital and things like that. And you're constantly ping-ponging between both. I think that's a good sign. It's because you're trying to serve your business partners, but ultimately also trying to serve the larger business as well.
What I took away from that I think is brilliant, and it's not incumbent upon them, the engineering team or product team, to understand like your vernacular. It's actually incumbent upon you to understand what they're saying. And in order to do that, you have to take the time to be like, well, I need to figure out what's going on with servers here. I need to figure out what cloud compute is. And I think this was like before AWS was ever around, right? Like you had to get down and dirty with some technical stuff that probably felt over your head at the time.
Oh, completely felt over my head. I mean, literally the amount of times I had to ask engineers, hey, can you please talk to me like I'm kindergarten? And they're like, no. Can you please talk to me like I'm in preschool? And look, I think, the fun part I realized, like, engineers love to be very precise. And they don't, and I think finance people, the art is like square peg, round hole, and just you kind of summarize a little bit, right? You kind of take the 80 of the 20, because let's say when it comes to Excel or you're presenting to the board, you can't go through that level of detail, right? You have to abstract up to something that's a higher level that people can understand, right? And so I think that's sort of the interesting part. And that was the fun part of how you build these relationships, because ultimately you want to make finance fun. The more you can get out of the spreadsheets, that's the necessary bread and butter of how we do, right? So it's PowerPoint, it's email, it's planning, it's Excel. But to the extent you can make it more relational too, I think that just makes the job more fun, right? Than just being in the weeds in Excel. And it gets you out of your comfort zone to help, again, work with your business partners to help solve their problems.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Morgan Stanley recently said NetSuite is under the threat of disruption. That's right, NetSuite, the you never get fired for buying it software. So what's the threat? The answer, Rillet. Rillet is the AI native ERP modern finance teams are switching to because it's faster, simpler, and 100% built for how teams operate today. It doesn't take 12 months to implement. It doesn't feel like filing taxes to use, and your accounting team will actually love it. PostScript closes the books in only 3 days. Windsurf, bet you heard of them. They run finance with just 2 people. And Rillet is backed by Sequoia Capital. Yes, that's Sequoia. Unicorns like PostScript and Windsurf and hundreds of other companies have made the switch, and they're closing books in record time. If I were running a finance team today, I wouldn't default to legacy. I'd look at what's coming next, and Rillet is here. You don't want to be that guy at cocktail parties complaining about how bad his ERP is. Wait, am I the only guy who talks about ERPs around a keg? See how fast your team can move. Book a demo at rillet.com/metrics. That's RILLET.com/metrics. RILLET.com/metrics. As a CFO, you're expected to bring clarity to everything, including how your company manages ownership. The tools you use should make that easier, not harder. But when they come with hidden fees, data you can't always trust, and support you can't rely on, you end up with more frustration than clarity. That's where Pulley comes in. Pulley is the cap table management platform built for finance leaders who need accurate, decision-ready data from a system that works for your business, not against it. With Pulley, you get intuitive workflows, audit-ready reporting, and support you can count on, all backed by predictable pricing you can plan around, so you can stay compliant and make smarter decisions about your company's future. Manage everything from fundraise modeling to ASC 718 reporting to custom liquidity programs, all on one trusted platform. Hundreds of high-growth companies like Linear, Fathom, and Runway trust Pulley to help turn ownership into a strategic advantage. And joining them is now easier than ever. You can switch to Pulley in as little as 5 days. And for a limited time, they're offering 25% off your first year. To claim your exclusive offer, visit pulley.com/mostlymetrics. That is PULLEY.com/mostlymetrics. pulley.com/mostlymetrics. Well, if you've listened to this podcast before, you definitely know that I think it's cool to be a fan of business. I'm obsessed with researching how the best companies operate and specifically how they manage their money. And I've learned that a company's financial stack can make the difference between world domination and obscurity. That's why I want to tell you about Brex, because I want you to rule the world. Brex is an impressive financial services and software company that has grown immensely since it was founded in 2017. In just the last year alone, Brex accelerated customer acquisition by 50%, with 91% growth in enterprise customers. And there's good reason that over 30,000 companies from startups to enterprises have flocked to Brex. Brex offers the world's smartest corporate card on a full-stack global platform that is everything CFOs need to manage their finances on an elite level. Plus, they offer modern banking and treasury, as well as intuitive expenses and accounting automation, bill pay, and travel. Wow, it's all in the roster whenever you need it. Brex grows with you. CFOs tell me all the time that Brex makes it easy to control spend before it happens, automate annoying tasks, and optimize their finances. Because listen, at the end of the day, Brex helps them make every dollar count. So if you're a fan of smart businesses too, check out Brex at brex.com/metrics. That's brex.com/metrics. How did you balance what was urgent versus what was important? And my mind's going to like an Eisenhower matrix or something, but I imagine at Facebook, it probably felt like your hair was on fire every day.
Yeah, I don't know if I did that precisely well. Usually I would say you kind of follow the dollars in a way, right? Like, okay,
say more.
Yeah, like what's existential, right? Like, of course, there's two pieces. We need to monetize the business. And in the time I was there, it was mostly let's monetize so that we can continue fund growth, right? Like we knew that Mark had this unshakable belief that if we continue to build a product that delivered value, we'd have enough shots on goal to get the monetization right. Right. And so for me, I think like when it comes to, so with that framing, I spent a lot of time with the engineering team to understand user growth so that we could then do financing and spend the capital in an appropriate way to keep up with that user growth. So I think for me, that's usually following the dollars. And I guess even abstracting above that is like, why do we need so many dollars? Why is there so much CapEx that we need to fund this growth? It was like, oh, well, there's user engagement. Oh, interesting. Okay, you keep peeling that onion, like, okay, why is there so much user engagement? Oh, it actually turns out that users upload a lot of photos, right? Now you can remember, I'm dating myself, but that wasn't really a thing, right? Like that was just something Facebook stumbled into when they launched the ability to change a profile pic. And what they realized was like, oh, wow, people are constantly changing their profile pictures, but really it was just to share what was going on. And then it made sense to roll that out into features that people could do that, in a more frictionless way.
I had no idea because it's like the repository of the most photos in the world. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then even the idea of tagging was like, well, you want to be able to share with your friends in either way. And so it just sort of extended from that. And you got a funny story was one of the most important days in the entire year in Facebook when it comes to infrastructure, engineering, and product engagement was actually Halloween. Because and I don't know if that's true anymore, but for the longest time, that was the day the most activity. And remember, it's concurrent activity, right? Because if a user in Asia is showing up in whatever at midnight, and then someone in America is showing up, at noon, that's the same amount of infrastructure, but it's not used literally at the exact same time. So Halloween turns out that everyone uploads pictures of their kids and costumes, themselves, young people, and then it's also a time where people go view the photos too, because everyone wants to see, oh, what else? What did CJ dress up as this year? Things like that. And so that ended up being the most important day of the year. But that's all comes to peeling the onion. Like I could literally trace back, okay, here, because October is coming, we need to put a large server order in over the summer because that's going to be a really big day of user engagement. Right. And it turns out user engagement, photos, can we, and then, just you should continue to peel the onion. Can we monetize photos? Well, actually not as well, because there's not as much context, which is hilarious to even say that now. Like, what is Instagram? It is literally
photos, the
largest monetization and video now vehicle for advertising against those things. And so if you play that long thing, now no one knew what it would turn into. We all just knew like, well, let's continue to really focus on engagement and making the app as fun and as social as can be. And if you have enough smart people looking at that, can we monetize in a way that's not intrusive? Can we monetize in a way where when the app is delivering value, not distracting from value, right? Because, you see that what's some of the most frustrating form of ads you see today. You don't see it as much, but like you have the whole teardown, right? You're trying to see a piece of content and this gigantic ad shows up and you're trying to find the X and you can't even X out of it, right? That's the most distracting form of advertising, in my opinion, or monetization, let's say. But you really want to find a way that is really non-obtrusive. That's even additive, right? That's why Google, of course, is sort of like those blue links look like all other links. They're sort of additive. Now they play that through. Maybe it's a distraction now, but that was the same thinking with Facebook. So if the finance person stopped then and said, no, like, gosh, we can't, we have to like degrade the quality of the photos. We don't have enough capital to do that. Well, one, that wouldn't have flown at Facebook, but two, that would have gotten in the way of what could eventually be this long journey of really that theme of investing and monetizing, being able to build a valuable product that does both, delivers value to your end user and monetizes in sort of an organic way.
This sounds like a ridiculous Monday morning quarterback statement because Meta's now one of the most valuable companies in the world. I think they're over like $1 trillion. But like, it kind of broke the rule of like, hey, just get a bunch of people on an activity and figure out how to monetize it later. Like the Silicon Valley advice now would be like, you got to know how you're going to make money off something at the start.
Yeah, that's true. I've been around now long enough to say myself, there's been cycles of that. So I think we were fortunate enough, one, to be growing that quickly. So it was sort of hard to argue with.
It worked better than anything ever.
But back then, the monetization wasn't as good as it is now. And that took faith. I mean, in fact, one of the scariest things for a finance person, we had a great advertising deal with Microsoft. They were paying us a guaranteed CPM on all these page views. But if anyone remembers back then, you could even probably find like archives of it. These were old school banner ads that were being served through the Microsoft, and that took a lot of commitment from the management team and Mark to walk away from that to say, look, we're going to build our own ad product. We see all of the engagement. The only way we're going to do this the best is if we can do it ourselves. And that I don't think always is a true statement, right? Like nowadays for example, with AWS, if you're starting a company that's growing quickly, AWS can probably serve you for a very long time, or GCP or Azure, things like that. But back then, that took a lot of, I think, courage to walk away from that to build it ourselves. But it was also an environment where I think user growth, there was no other company growing that quickly. And so like, it was very obvious that like, look, we should continue to fund this growth. Whereas you're right now, I think the story is a little different. I don't think it is growth at all costs. I think investors, shareholders want to see probably a closer, more nearer term path to profitability than sort of previously.
And I'm sure you picked up on a number of ways to communicate like what we need to do as a team here, and not always just speak in financial terms. But like you mentioned it before, there's this persistent narrative that the CFO is the ultimate no person. At this point in your career, it's your first tech job. Did you develop like this glass half full way that you could reframe like the no so people could get on board to what you're trying to do as the FP&A team?
I think that came over time. I mean,
Okay.
I think that was probably, I think it took me to see more patterns like this, like, then moving to Asana, like another product-led growth company, a different sector, SaaS, but still sort of trying to be product-led. I think candidly at Facebook, I didn't say no because I knew the answer was sort of probably out of my hands anyway. But in my mind, I said no, but I was very stressed about it. Right. I don't think
Right.
I don't think I embraced sort of the unknown that well. Right. And for me, like I needed to see an ROI very quickly for me to feel comfortable and good about it. Like something as simple as like, we should, Mark was pretty clear. Like we should be growing engineering functions as fast as they can indefinitely, right? To me, I was like, well, at some point, most successful businesses, you grow your expense and headcount investment slower than revenue. But for him, he knew that was just sort of the state of the art to compete, right? We were competing with Google and other companies. And so that made me really uncomfortable. But I think as I became, I don't know, older or more seasoned or had been at a couple more startups, I think you start to understand the path to being successful as a business is really finding ways to say yes, right? Like you were saying, like you don't want to be the naysayer. And I think that's just business partner damaging too, right? If you go into every meeting with glass half empty, like, any good business will track, right? Dashboard, weekly, monthly, quarterly. And if you go in there every meeting with your business partners looking at like, hey, why do we miss this? Why are we missing that? Because invariably that's going to happen, right? It's not always going to be green. You're not always going to be, exceeding quota or whatever other metric or leads or whatever metric you're looking at. But again, if you go to from a point of curiosity, right, sort of table stakes, so just sort of like human interaction and business partnership, but also really this mindset like what's working, we should double down on that, right? That's the question I ask a lot of business partners too, is like, gosh, you have these new areas, that's great, but let's talk about what's working so well in your world today, and how do we do even more with that? How do we double down investment in performance marketing? Which channels are working really well? Which regions are we growing really well? Right? Wow, we have all this usage. I got to sign. Remember, we had basically, without even trying to monetize internationally, without even a sales team, we think we were like 2/3, 1/3 in terms of member usage, like free usage internationally. But we didn't even have an international product. It wasn't even translated. Like, oh my gosh, we're paying for all this free usage. That's actually, I view it, that's actually a great thing. I remember the engineers were scratching their head because, again, they saw me as the no person. I'm like, no, that's an awesome thing. How can we, the product is probably not even great there because it's not even translated. It's probably slower internationally, working. But something's working, and people are paying us, even though, we haven't really made it that easy. We didn't, we didn't actually do anything like that. And so for me, that's sort of the thing I always have to check myself with. Try to continue to find things. It's easier now, of course. Find areas of the business to get excited about, because there are, right? Any business is going to have something where you're delivering value, you're over delivering value, which is great. And you really want to lean into that and spend even more time on that, because I think that's going to be a really ripe area for you to, let's say, continue to grow that, sustain it, protect it, right? Make sure that's sort of like sacred in a way, right? If membership is using you in a certain way, a certain feature, you want to really make sure that can be even better and protected, and not, say, thrown out with some other new initiative or carefully dealt with over time. And so, I mean, every day I try to ask myself that, and that gets me excited too. Personally, it's actually it's selfish in a way. Like, if I find things that are working in the business, that gets me really excited, because it means I know we're delivering value. It helps me and the team when we're running analyses. How do we make that part even better? Can we even take nuggets of these ideas where it's almost like we're trying to run product? Where should we take things next? Hey, here's what I see in the data today, and 3/4 of the time, the product teams are like, oh, we thought about that. Here's the reason, like, oh, okay, well, we tried. And other times, like, oh, there might be something there. We'll consider that in the next sort of sprint planning process. Let's have a debate about that.
But like, that's a kick-ass Jedi mind trick, because what you're saying is you're pointing out the positives. Here are the things that we have to double down on. I'm excited about this. And like, inevitably, that also means we can't do these things because we're doubling down on this. So by staying positive and saying, I want to be the person who says yes to invest in stuff, you're helping hone in on what's working. And like, the other stuff naturally falls by the wayside because it's not as exciting and it's not as value accretive.
Yeah, often the other things will be deprioritized, right? And that's the hard part. Then the other side, you don't want to go too far in that, where then you literally are just leaning on one stool of, let's say, a proverbial business chair. But, to me, that's sort of, again, I like to keep things simple, right? And after all the complexities and stress of working out all these, different high growth companies, sometimes like I want to take things back to basics. And I think that's a fundamental one for me, at least. I think others can deal with it in different ways, which of course you want to be data driven, but data driven often leads you to say, oh, here's where we're red, here's where we're below, here's where we're above. But I think even, below that, just as psychology wise, I think it's just healthier and happier, and you can be more effective ultimately by finding ways of joy and what's working and really bringing people along the ride for that story, right? And at the same time, you do have to honor the other things that people want to do and say, look, those are going to be deprioritized for now. Or, hey, then it becomes, you don't just say no to those, like, well, that's priority 2. We can only deal with priority 1. It's more like, how do we then, sort of not fail fast, but how do we invest a certain amount in this new area where we can then measure and put measurement in place to say, if we see that, then that might actually be elevated into sort of priority 1, something else you can be excited about, right? And I think that's the dance of being at a startup period, especially like, being on the product side, but certainly on the finance side, where you're trying to keep up. You want to honor that we don't have it all figured out. You need to invest in these new areas as well. And you want to try to do that in almost the fastest and most cost-effective way possible, so that we can try it, we can launch it, and then if it works, great, we can continue to double down. And if not, then, I'm glad we tried, and, we can sort of deprioritize that, and on to the next one.
That's awesome. Ed, I want to transition to talk about your experiences at Asana. Before we go too deep, you ran all the functions you claim nobody else wanted, but did that really include 4 chefs?
Yeah, it was. It did. I at Asana, I give a lot of credit to Dustin and Justin. They care deeply about culture and health and well-being, right? Asana is actually a yoga pose. So the funny thing is, I always laugh. Like I always like challenge our marketing team when you type Asana, and can we get the SEO to put our company to the top? But it's always couldn't be beaten out by sort of the yoga and all of the content on the web. And because of that sort of focus on wellness and well-being, because they, to their credit, they I think similar and maybe incorporated from the Facebook culture, like, look, we recognize this is going to be a marathon. We working at startups is really hard. It's going to be, we're in the early innings of a long-term ball game, so to speak. And one of the decisions they made early on was you are what you eat, right? So to make sure to invest in a culinary team that, really, literally, I would see the order list here. I'm like organic, everything, and heavily focused on vegetables, very little fried things. And so that was, I probably a little head scratching for those on the outside, even for me coming in, again, being a finance person. But again, seeing some of the benefits of really caring about your people at Facebook. Now, a lot of this, if you play it out to the extreme, you extrapolate out, you can look down like, oh, why are we, I don't know, making the employees getting massages at their desk? That didn't happen at Facebook Asana. But I think the core motivation is good, which is like, look, we're thankful to people who work so hard because we care about the mission. And so, of course, you want to try to take care of them to the extent that you can. So sorry, long answer to your question. Yes, that is that rumor.
I just wanted to know if you got input on, like, we're having chicken parm today, but it sounds like that wouldn't fit the bill for healthy.
There was voting in Asana. You can vote in Asana, and you could give hearts, and the top dishes would be elevated to the top. I'm pretty boring in that regard too. I actually didn't mind it. Like, as I gotten older, I'm like, oh, I have to start making trade-offs, not for necessarily from taste, but for health and well-being.
I think you told me that Asana plans by episodes, not quarters. Can you explain that, and how did that format impact how you approach budgeting and forecasting?
Yeah, well, I think for me, the episodes part, one, they actually ran longer than quarters, which is great. Because if you think about quarters,
what's an episode? How long is it?
Yeah, I forgot. Maybe it was. They were only, I think it was about 3.5 or 3 episodes in a year,
it's like
so slightly longer than a quarter. And if you think about a quarter, though, it's sort of arbitrary, right? Like, March 31st, June 30, and then to force the company, the rest of the company to align around that, especially at an earlier stage, you want to be a little more organic to that. And for Dustin and the product teams, they organize themselves in these episodes. But ultimately, it was a great way to align, a forcing function to align the entire company to the same planning cadence, which is awesome. So what would happen is not even just setting, you can't just say, okay, we're going to have these episodes, they run longer than quarters, everyone just plan. What the company would actually do was, and even as we got bigger, everyone from the different offices would come to HQ in San Francisco. And leading up to that, it would be roadmap planning week. And so basically all of the major workflows and functions would have their own roadmap planning doc, where basically they would prioritize all the things that really mattered. So let's say existing technical debt you needed to pay down, new product innovation, and it would be split: monetization, user onboarding and engagement, new features, your back end, right? Finance had our own too. And so it was a really great investment to make in terms of time, because this is a lot of time for the entire company to, one, you can opt into the things that matter to you, right? So for me, of course, I would be sitting in engagement, right? Because that was led to ultimately revenue and new product development as well. Sales would sit in those too. And, sales, I'd invite sales to sit in on the finance one as well, because, a lot of our roadmap, and what we were trying to deliver in terms of BI and CRM was going to be overlapping. And so there has never been another company like that where literally it was an open and transparent process where you could opt into as many of them as you want. Practically, you couldn't sit in on all of them, of course. But it literally aligned so that I could, in my, let's say, when my team was planning revenue, literally we can point to the monetization team's roadmap doc and say, well, actually, on August 7th, we're going to test a new upgrade motion so that, this modal pops up when someone's reached this type of trigger. Or we're going to encourage a template here. Or, we're going to make the monetization button larger or something like that, right? Or we're going to have a new invite prompt. And literally we should tie basically improvements in what we're expecting in revenue to the exact product roadmap. Now, that seems obvious, but like the level of specificity that we had against that was great. And then one thing is just the plan, right? Like, so what's the saying? Like, as soon as you say your budget's done, the next day it's wrong, right?
Yeah,
Because
just how wrong.
that's not that. Yeah, exactly. That's not the point of a budget, is to be right. Of course, you do everything you can, but for us, it gave us this rich sort of planning and then sort of accountability to, who was in charge of launching that monetization feature, and then it creates this rich dialogue versus finding out about it after the fact. Right. And a lot of times finance functions, I think, to their credit, you're backwards looking because that takes a lot of work to figure out what happened. And then you look and say in August, when that monetization feature doesn't launch, you go load up August revenue and you say, oh, wait, why did we miss? And you sort of go through this sort of series of autopsies of trying to understand, what happened. Whereas now, because of this planning was so aligned, we can get updates again in Asana. Of course, I'm heavily biased, still use the tool. In Asana, we would get a notification like, hey, this feature is in jeopardy of getting delayed for these reasons. And so we would know that ahead of time, right? And so it even helped with forecasting too, so that we could run various scenarios where, okay, this gets pushed out. This might have a trickle down effect of other monetization initiatives, or, the back end, rewrite to make the product more performant might impact user growth. And we know this ahead of time. So it's a great way of alignment, but also continued accountability and tracking along the way that almost to this day, I've never seen something, and I presume the company still does this, but over the 4 years I was there, from 30 to 150 people, from 1 million in ARR to over 50, we were using that process, and it made the finance team incredibly efficient at figuring out what was the state of affairs of what was going on in the business.
That's an excellent overview. And there's something to be said about why do we plan in these 3-month quarters? And I think it's just because that's when the financial results come out, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way to collaborate with others.
That's right. That's right. And so to this day, I think it is possible to look at the time. I'll tell you, as someone who was wanted to go 1,000,000 miles per hour, I was like, wait, why are we slowing down for a whole week with all of these meetings? But it was the one time I actually saw engineers committed to a lot of meetings. They look forward to it because it's a way for them to thoughtfully plan all of the things that they wanted to deal with versus just being told tops down, here are the priorities, everyone get on board, and we're moving forward, like presented in all hands, right? But literally you could bring everyone along for the ride. Everyone, if they wanted, could read all the Google Docs as they were being written after the fact to understand, right? So there should, in theory, be no surprises. And that gave me a very powerful idea or opportunity for finance to play, which is like, oh yeah, of course, we should be bringing everyone along for the ride as well. Like, you may have one Excel model that perfectly models everything, but if not everyone is along for the ride, understands how they impact each piece of the roadmap planning, the episodes, and the corporate model, then that's a missed opportunity for everyone to be a part of that journey, and then even ultimately for accountability, right? And who my team can partner with that can help drive some of these things. So in a nerdy way, for me, like at every startup that I'm at, like my responsibility is, one, I feel like, is to build sort of this very multivariate equation of business success, right? There's lots of levers, right? It's like, hey, we have to have marketing in the right place. We have to get the word out. We have to have user growth. And in the Asana case, we have to have engagement, deliver value, more seats. We need to build a sales team. We need to have low churn. So it's multivariate. And in the beginning, I thought I needed to be right about those things. But actually, that's a shared tool for me to then go out with business partners and have a face to each of those coefficients and say, hey, here's how I view the state of affairs. Help me come up and make this more accurate, making sure I have all the inputs, the right inputs to our business success. And who do you think is best leading each of these coefficients? And I'm going to establish a dialogue and a dashboard and an operating routine with each of them, so that we are all along shared journey for this sort of multivariate equation, which I know totally sounds geeky, but it's sort of shared business model input, which to me is accountability. Yes, you want to be successful. Yes, you want to be right. But to me, the things you can control are sort of the creation of this shared understanding of this business model, and then the accountability and leadership and right resourcing and investment, right? Going back to prioritization and investment for each of those areas that impact that sort of multivariate equation business model.
And I want to drill into that because I've heard you say, Ed, that sometimes you don't need a model that just shows causation. It's like right there on the page, because we all want that. But correlation and business intuition, that can essentially be enough. Can you share an example from Asana and figuring out the monetization model where, like, oh, this just feels right as a metric was good enough? It didn't have to be statistically bulletproof?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the cool part of being at a startup. Like, not everything is figured out. So of course you search for causal things, right? Like, A resulted in B, but the reality is, I think that can slow you down. You can be waiting a long time to aggregate enough data points to prove that out. Oh, and it may never come. And that's just not going to be a pace that's feasible for any high growth company. I don't care what stage really that you're at, seed, A, B. And a lot of it, you just have to, one, in the beginning, I think when you have very little, you go off of intuition, of course, and that's going to be an important thing for a while. But I think the next best thing to that is really correlation, right? And one example that really sticks out to me was when I got on board, I was saying, like, wait, what? People are showing up every day to put their credit card down in Asana and start using the product. Right? I'm like, okay, but we also have a free product. Like, what causes them to want to pay, right? We had features you needed to upgrade to, premium features. We had certain member limits after you got to a certain point. And so again, it wasn't like, rocket science for me. I'm like, well, let me at least look at the correlation. People over time, of course, you backward test, right? Let me look at all the past data. Who with just one person paid us, right? You look at the kind of the noise. All right, well, one member in each workspace, we call them, put down their credit card. Okay, that's interesting. All right, well, there's a lot of one person workspaces that never paid us, but the percentage is low, and it jumps around a lot. And then, okay, let me look at 2, let me look at 3, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? And you keep going up, and then you sort of marry that back to, well, our product is a collaborative product, right? Certainly a lot of people are using this for individual task managers. I still use it with my wife to go. She gives me tasks all the time that I need to do to manage the household. But I was like, well, 2, it just seems like, not necessarily collaborative, but 3 feels like a team. You're organizing something. And 4 and 5, of course, those are just extensions and degrees beyond that. When you look back historically and back tested it, sure, they were all really similar, but we needed to pick one to drive the team to align around, right? And, we were transparent, like, we don't know. And we picked 3. We picked 3 because 5 felt like too many and 2 felt like too few. So we picked 3. And it did look pretty stable when you back tested month to month. And so that was what we picked. And that was what we went with for a long time. It's like, well, what's the initial, not just monetization trigger, but, let's try this out as something the product team should organize around, right? Like, how many, we call it 3D28s, right? How many, 3 monthly active users in one workspace can we get to from 1, right? And so what did that, so we picked it, we dared to be wrong in a way, but it made a lot of sense. The data back tested looked like it was pretty stable relationship. But the benefits of that were way outweighed sort of any more time we wanted to be more, we would spend to be more right, which is then we can say, okay, product teams, this is our goal. Well, like that, now they got to organize themselves. Like, well, actually, we probably need a user onboarding team to look at that. And as part of user onboarding, it's not just one user. Maybe we should make invites and the use cases more prominent. And it just led to this really ripe set of thinking that was then tied to a metric. I mean, I think it's one thing to have intuition and sort of plan teams around, but I think everyone likes to see results. Everyone likes, and revenue is too much of a lagging indicator. You need something way more upstream. And so, I think the teams were excited to try to align to that. Like, wow, how many 3D28s did we get? How many from signups or from one member joining did we get to 3 members? And we would measure that over time. And it led to a lot of ripe ideas around invites. To this day, you can see that play out, like templates. Like, you want to create better use cases for members to go join when they sign up to Asana. Like, oh my gosh, I can use this for recruiting. Oh wait, how do other people use it for recruiting? Oh, here's a template for that. Let me invite people. Right. And so it led to this really right with that, even in ways I didn't intend. Look, I was just trying to build a model to understand what new MRR was going to look like. I'm like, okay, look, let me try to bring the team along for this journey of understanding that. But it had way larger impacts beyond sort of my focus, which was a really wonderful thing. And that we just kept coming back to talk. And then in fact, that made sense for the longest time for us to do that. Eventually it got more complicated with the sales-led motion. And we're just literally shoving people in, starting new, right? There's sort of more of a tops-down motion. But for the bottoms-up piece, that was a very natural, intuitive way for us to drive the business. It had larger impacts than I anticipated.
Ed, I feel like I'm having deja vu here because a couple of weeks ago we spoke to Sarah Riley. She's the CFO at DBT Labs now, but she was she was the FP&A leader at Zoom at the time during COVID that they were growing like gangbusters. And I was like, Sarah, like, why does the free plan cut off at 40 minutes? Like, it seems like such like an arbitrary number. And she gave me like the exact same explanation that you gave. Like, we just had to choose something and go with it. And like 30 felt too short. 35 felt like extremely random. And like over 45, most meetings would be done by then. And it wasn't exactly a scientific like explanation, but like it made sense. Just like make a choice and go with it.
Right. Exactly. Thanks for sharing that. That's a great story.
Ed, you mentioned that people were putting Asana on credit cards without ever talking to sales. When did you realize that the company needed to pivot from like this beautiful bottoms up motion to more of like a proactive sales motion?
Yeah, look, we were seeing a bunch of signs of that. And I will say internally there was resistance because there's that exact question, like, wait, this is the most frictionless way to buy. It's bottoms up. We're giving you most of the product, the 45 minutes of the 3 users, most of the product for free. When you deliver enough value, why do we need to spin up this large entity of a sales organization? Because if the value is being delivered, someone will just opt to pay for it, right? It just makes sense. Or we'll have the right free rate limiters in there, and they'll just trigger to pay. But I think sales to me is because sales enablement comes to mind. It's like a lot of companies require more things, right? Because if you think about the nature of what people are putting in Asana or any enterprise product, it's pretty sensitive stuff. It's literally like how businesses operate. Like one of our largest customers at the time was Uber, and they were literally using Asana as the playbook to penetrate new cities and countries. So you can imagine how complex that's going to be. I think it was a series of 150 tasks that they kept replicating because they could, this template, this playbook, copy over and over again.
That's a legendary playbook, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
I give some credit to Asana with correlation or causation to Asana. But some companies they have security requirements. What if some of them are actually regulated? Like if you're a banking institution, like the tools that you use, have to meet a certain level of security standards, right? And there's just even simple things, right? So because we're bottoms up, as a sort of victim of our success, when we saw usage, as this was one, I remember at Google, we saw large different pockets. It's a large company, even back then, large pockets of usage, of paid usage from 3 different orgs. There was like an engineering team, a separate engineering team, product management team. I think it was a marketing team. So 3 or 4. But when they got really big, at a certain point, we're like, hey, we want to actually give you a discount. Because look at if you add all it up together, there's going to be a discount. And also, do you want to just create headroom because your groups are expanding? And hopefully our goal was to try to make this a larger tool within the company. Let's say within some engineering division. But the reality came down to whose cost center is this, right? The marketing team didn't want to pony up for the engineering headcount and the engineering seats. And so literally that's why for us, we're like, well, actually, who can navigate that? It's not worthwhile time for an engineer to do that, or certainly not Dustin. Well, in the early days, it was Dustin, but ultimately we needed sales leadership to help us navigate the org, right? And also the security requirement to get that sort of top-down sale to make sort of the bottoms up actually continue to happen, right? And so once we saw, so it was almost like a product of our success was we were just hitting these limits of all these bottoms up usage at large companies from different groups and different, let's say, cost centers, because a lot of them were like, wait, I don't have budget for this amount. I'd love to fund it, but I can't. Or just straight up security requirements, SOC 2 compliance, things like that. They needed to understand what our security policies were because of the sensitive information. So, once we started doing that, it wasn't like it was like stop the bottoms up, but it was almost like, how do we organically start to build and bolt on this other motion so that we can continue to grow? Because the vision really was at Asana was, okay, we're great for small companies and teams, but we know we can be for growing companies. Could we use that at Asana itself? We, of course, ate our own dog food, so to speak.
Yeah, and I always joke that it's dangerous to overly romanticize PLG. Like JP Morgan Chase is not going to buy 10,000 licenses on a credit card. It just doesn't work that way. Like if you want to play with the big dogs and sell those deals, maybe it's in the edge of the wedge and an entry point to get in, but you're going to need a person to talk to another person to get it over the line.
That's right. And I think this is, as you go over the history of like SaaS, you can see, I think there's a lot of examples of companies knocking the cover off the ball, so to speak, around sort of SMBs, serving SMBs real through this PLG motion. It's very efficient, right? Whatever sales team you hire and organization, they're going to look really efficient because of that motion. And then you quickly realize like, gosh, like if we don't start building this other feature set and also this other capability to sell, we're probably going to saturate our market pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to do that as early as possible, right? Even if it's painful, right? Engineers, believe me, engineers didn't want to be building like enterprise grade security features.
Single sign-on, yeah.
Single sign-on, things like even just like auditability rights, right? Like even provisioning, like if someone's getting offboarded, how do they make that seamlessly integrated into their offboarding tool? But those are really important. And the last thing you want to do, I think, is get caught a little flat, then trying to go upstream and building these features out. Because then there's also even brand, right? Everyone knows you as a brand, and like, hey, can you really serve me in that way? And so I think that's the nuance. I think, again, investing in both sides, you really want to be able to invest on both. One part is really working, so you want to really continue that. But you have to, in a way, you have to like play out success. If we're successful, this is going to happen. So then you work backwards from, what do we need to do today to start doing that?
Ed, you have an amazing business model, man. This is so fun. And so I want to talk about Daffy and the monetization model there. Maybe just to start off, you could tell us a bit on what Daffy does, and then you can touch on how it makes money doing that.
You got it. Yeah. Thanks for asking. Yeah. So Daffy is actually, it's a fun play on words. It's the donor advised fund for you, Daffy, not Daffy the duck, but donor advised fund for you. And I think DAFs have actually been around for a while. So donor advised funds have been around for decades. And just starting there, what it allows people to do, it allows you to basically donate assets, whether they be cash or stock or even crypto today. And let's say if you have a tax burden coming up, it allows you to donate as much as you want and then over time give to charity. So every year about 60 million households give over $500 billion, believe it or not, in the United States. We're an incredibly charitable country, which is an amazing thing.
That's a big number.
Right. Very large number. And that's been steadily growing. It doesn't really go down. In fact, it goes up in hard years which makes sense. So donor advised fund, it's an amazing vehicle to allow you to sort of like match sort of the timing of your tax burden with any appreciated asset you have. But then the reality is you don't have to give all that at once to charity. A lot of times you need to figure that out. Or you want to give to a certain amount of charities over time. And then you never know. Maybe some charitable needs come up over time. And so that's been around for a long time, like, 529 plans for colleges or 401ks. But it's a huge market. I think it's over like $250 billion in assets in DAFs today, and over 1 million DAFs exist in the United States. But the truth is, this space hasn't really been innovated on in a long time, right? And so Daffy, why I joined, why it's so interesting. Yes, like a lot of stuff, we're innovating on product, and we can talk about that. But we're also innovating on business model. So I think you can be disruptive on product, but I think to the extent you can also be disruptive on business model, I think that can be pretty game changing. And so how does this work today? So most DAFs, like a lot of financial tools, they charge an AUM fee. So basically, assets. So it's going to be, let's say 60 basis points is, I think, the average DAF cost per year for the number of assets that you have with them. So if you have a business like that, well, what happens? You optimize what you're monetized for,
Get
right?
that number up.
So that it'll be growth in assets at all costs. Whereas with Daffy, we have the membership model, right? It's per members per month, right? So we even have a free tier, or for a couple of bucks a month, you can, $3 a month, you can use Daffy. You can have your own DAF to more. And what that allows us to do, it allows us to basically serve the most amount of people as possible, right? The 60 million households versus the 1.6 million DAFs that are there. And the reality is a lot of DAFs have minimums, right? Again, serving because of the AUM fee, the DAF minimums can, in most of the incumbents, can be as high as $25,000 to $50,000. That's not a lot of people don't have that amount of money to give to charity or put in DAF. Whereas with us, it allows us to serve the most amount of people and frankly build product for the people who show up every month, who I love, who literally donate through their credit card. They contribute $20 to Daffy every month and send that straight away to their local charity that they care about. All the way up to, we're building features to allow in a seamless way for members to donate tens of millions of dollars in crypto or stock and appreciated assets in a seamless way from your mobile phone. And we build product to optimize around that and the feature set that they require. So to me, that's the business model really was disruptive in a way. One, it allows us because we're more cost effective and increased our TAM. Sure, that's the sort of the finance thinking, but it also allows the company to even plan that way. So, let's say we just launched campaigns. I think we were talking about sort of this campaigns feature we launched. I don't know any other DAF that would launch a campaigns feature because it's really about allowing our own members to create their own campaigns for charities that they care about to have their other members join. Right. And we see campaigns for a couple $100, raise money, people donate $25 to $50. Yeah. Earlier we launched things like, custom portfolios where people who have a lot of assets have very specific ways that they want their assets to be invested in, some in crypto, some portion in crypto, and others in, certain index funds or causes that they care about.
Ed, you've said that a business model shapes your destiny, but I'm going to steal that. That's an amazing line. What's something surprising that you've seen percolate through Daffy's operations simply because of that choice not to charge based on AUM?
Yeah, I would say I'm really surprised about how our product, which I really viewed as an individual thing, right? Like giving and your financial sort of status.
That's a very personal thing.
It is a personal thing. Like, I mean, think about when was the last time you talked about your friends like, oh, I just donated to this charity, or here's, I have this big tax bill coming due because of this thing, right? That doesn't just come up in everyday conversation, right? But there's been a lot of ways. I think good companies, you listen to your customers, of course, your members, right? As we call them here at Daffy. And I've been surprised about how many different ways our members have asked us to build something that leads us into the workplace, right? Which is the last thing you think about with personal, finance and giving. And, one of our members said, look, this is really great. It's a great product. I'd love to have this rolled out at my company. Right. And we're like, oh, that's really interesting. And so we started to kind of, do a little due diligence. And it turns out there are actually a lot of companies who really care about offering benefits to their employees that are beyond, again, we joked about like the massages at the desk or things like that, or free dry cleaning, but like want to give benefits to their employees that really are mission aligned to sort of the value. I wouldn't say necessarily just the mission, but the values by which the company operates, right? Like, let's say startups and public companies, they're there ultimately to generate profit for shareholders. But I think if you're successful, I think it'd be great to offer benefits to allow employees to literally give back, right? And you see that, I think you see that theme increasing, certainly with products in the workplace as well, that allow companies to, facilitate not necessarily DAFs, but charitable giving and sort of this notion of giving back. And so that led to that one member outreach led to us building what we call, Daffy for Work product. So literally you can have literally a benefit. You can be up and running in the same day where basically you can match employees. There's lots of different iterations of this, but you can allow all your employees to have DAFs, and companies even match basically the contributions that these employees are giving to the charities that they care about.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, and so one of our customers, OpenAI, for example, has this mission, again, this greater mission than just themselves in generating profit. And so they've been one of our fastest growing Daffy for Work customers because, again, that mission just is really well aligned. And so we see a lot of their employees basically signing up and taking advantage of that benefit.
Ed, we did a prep call where your VP of marketing, Chelsea, gave you a nice compliment. She said you're a glass half full kind of guy as a CFO. And you like to say, how might we? There's this stigma that CFOs are the ones who say no all day, which we hit on before. How do you flip the approach to looking for ways to say yes?
Finance people lead by data, right? And I think to the extent you can find analyses or trends that are working well, that are either surprising or even confirmatory of what business partners are doing, I think that one helps you really realize like what value are we delivering, what's working actually, right? In the data. You can see it in the data themselves. So I think that's one way to do that. And I think to the extent that you can understand the product and again, use data to inform that, there may be some interesting trends that no one has really even seen. Because the reality is when you're moving quickly, and certainly at a startup, not everything is built out. There may not even be great BI tools or dashboards. And to the extent that you stay curious, I think curiosity is a big part of glass half full. I think it's easy to say no, right? That requires literally no curiosity, right? That's like sort of the curiosity killer.
It can be lazy.
Yeah. And I think any business, if you're curious enough, will have really interesting pockets of, yes, obvious ways of delivering value. And you should continue to say yes. And how do we do more? But ask yourself, what else haven't we thought about that I'm seeing in the data that maybe no one else is seeing? So that at least that's one way that comes to mind too. Again, it's like, I think finance at a core, whether you're saying yes or saying no, you're pretty much going to be data driven, right? You should be, right? To the extent that you can. Not always, like we talked about with the 3D 28s at Asana or the 45 minutes at Zoom. But I think to the extent that you can, confirm some intuition with data and then ask questions and be curious, I think is some powerful antidote against the no. The no will always be there when you need it, but I think it's a powerful enabler for yes.
That's awesome. Ed, I'm going to take you into what we call our long ask lightning round. So you're a successful guy, but I ask everybody who comes on the podcast, give me one thing you've messed up on the job before.
Sure. Oh, there's too many to count. I think one that is a powerful lesson was when building teams, I think it's natural to sort of look in the mirror and sort of hire what you know, like the quality, like, hey, look, I'm a private equity associate. So, that's gotten me this far. I did banking. And so I think it's easy to say that's what I know. Those are the strengths. I know how to utilize that strength in the team that I build, right? And so at Facebook, that I played this, I made all the classic mistakes as a manager doing that as I was building the team. And again, I think you can go really far and add a lot of value with sort of a similar team, but ultimately you want eventually, probably sooner than you think, you want diversified bench strength on your team. You want people who are deep subject matter experts in areas that you are not. And you want, frankly, that could be to an extreme. They're good at something that you'll never be. You have to entrust them to and unlock what they're great at. And they may never be good at the things that you value deeply. Let's say with banking or private equity, it's like analysis and being able to create really great stories in a visually compelling way with numbers and slides. There are some people on the team that I hired who could never do that, but were just so good at the other things. And eventually, I think that's the type of DNA of a successful team, is sort of this diversified bench strength. You don't want to be sort of monolithic or similar in thinking. And so that's one that I made once, and I really try not to repeat that anymore at any other startup after this. That's probably the biggest takeaway that I had as a first-time manager in terms of mistakes.
That's powerful, because you don't want to wake up one day and you're in a room with 5 people who are the exact same skill set as you. Like, you still don't have someone to solve for tax, you know?
That's right. Yeah, that one is a very good example of where you would just need to hire someone beyond that for sure. And I remember this came out of, so this is probably more than you're asking for. One of Facebook CFO, David Ebersman, a great leader. I had a chance to work with a lot of great leaders. He's probably the top 1% of 1% CFOs that I know. And he told me essentially when I was basically running FP&A, he told me my job was to outthink him, was to look around 2 corners, right? He's generally thinking about 1 corner, and he's like, your job is to outthink me and look around 2 corners. And the only way you could do that is with diversified strength. Like, I'm only as good as myself, but if I can empower my team that all think a little bit differently and all have different experiences that led them up to this role and where they are, and we create that right culture of openness and transparency, we may have a shot at doing that, right? For the betterment of the business, not just because David told me to do that.
Ed, if you could tell your younger self something knowing what you know today, what would you tell him?
Oh, so many things. I think one thing that comes to mind is be patient. Be patient.
We get that a lot from type A people. I wonder why.
I think it's hard to say, oh, hey, just be calm. I think a lot of old people look on you and say, oh, like, hey, stop. Things don't matter as much. But like when you're young, everything matters.
It does in the moment.
But I think to be maybe even more prescriptive and helpful is like, be patient is hard. But I think the input is just, if you continue to work hard and build good relationships, I think that'll take you really far, right? If you continue to, work really hard and you just not force yourself to be likable, but really invest in relationships where you care about somebody. I'm not saying best friends or anything like that, but you care about someone like in terms of like mutual respect as a colleague. I think that's powerful. Those are the ingredients. I think, at least what I know as finance leaders, that to me is sort of one of the most overriding similar characteristic that I see in great CFOs and finance leaders.
Nice. More of a technical one. Can you walk me through your finance software stack? What tools does your team use to get the job done?
Sure. Yeah, it's this is where I think I need to continue to be even more open-minded. But we of course we have the basics. We have QuickBooks, we have a BI tool, Keep. We have Linear for sort of task management and also sort of putting in requests. And I guess Google Sheets, Google Docs, I guess is sort of, if you want to call that a finance stack. Yeah. But I think the one thing that's been pretty unique here, where I've been, I think it's been really great, is with the engineering team, I've been learning a lot of sort of the product, that the way they use and what they measure. And so we have sort of this great tool on the back end to help administrate the entire product. It's actually literally called admin. And so in the past, I think I've been sheepish about asking engineering to build features for finance.
Yeah.
But here, because again, relationally, the relationship has been so good and the team has been fantastic at that, we've gone really far with building a lot of the custom, let's say, call them integrations or data set that we need to run our operations for, let's say, accounting. Like when we're a startup, a very young startup, but because of we're technically a nonprofit as a DAF, one arm of that, we need to actually go through audits. So can you imagine that literally on day one,
oh, wow.
You have to go through an audit. And again, that's sort of California. A lot of states have this rule. And so we've been able to pass audits because I've been working with the engineering team to sort of build out that administration tool that frankly have operations implications as well to that end. Now, I think eventually we'll add the usual stuff like we'll graduate to NetSuite. We could probably grow internationally as well. There'll be other entities we'll need to roll out. We'll probably need maybe a more robust BI tool. And then there's always the burgeoning AI tools here as well to help make the team more effective. But that's what we got now, sort of the bread and butter of, I think, what we need to help manage the business.
Ed, I'm smiling because every company I've ever been at had a homegrown tool called Admin.
No, yeah. Okay, there you go.
There are people nodding their head right now too.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Oh yeah. Oh, you got to go into admin to find that. Everybody has an admin.
Got it. Okay, got it. Oh, that's kind of new for me, so that's great. That's great.
Yeah. All right, last one I got for you, and there's got to be something good in here from either the Facebook or the Asana days. What's the craziest thing you've ever had someone try to expense?
Oh, okay. I got two. Sort of similar theme, and just because they're so funny. One were parking tickets. So again, this goes back to the Facebook days. We were in downtown Palo Alto and growing again like crazy. Adding 50% headcount growth, 100% headcount growth every year. But downtown Palo Alto was not built for companies growing that quickly.
For parking garages for all those people. Yeah,
there's just not enough parking permits that they could even process, let alone give us. Right, there was a wait list. And so, Mark made the very engineering-driven, efficient choice to say, look, how much are these parking tickets? Are they? Hey, Mark, they're $25 a pop. He's like, well, if we need engineers coding and they're driving, not everyone lives in walking distance to the office. So we're going to basically have a company policy that we will reimburse engineering tickets. Not engineering, anyone getting.
They are engineering tickets. They're just not.
To be fair, I've gotten my fair share too. I try not to. Find street parking, put myself diligent on the wait list, but you're going to get your invariable parking tickets. Meter maids were
very
diligent in their job down there. And so there's one salesperson. You imagine sales account execs. You're out on the road taking meetings with companies. So there's one sales exec who put in a T&E request, and I think it was for like $10,000 in parking tickets that had accrued. And I think, there's fines on top because his truck was parked out in the back garage. And so the tickets accrue, and because if the meter maid sees how many there are. And so I think over the span of like a month that this person was gone, it ended up being close to 10, and plus they passed it ended up being $10,000 in parking tickets.
You might have to bail him out of jail if it goes.
Yeah, exactly. I think there might have been 4 boots on the truck too. I think that's probably number one. And number two, again, sales related. I hate not to pick on sales, but often they have the largest T&E reports for good reason. I remember one of the sales offices, there was this large charge from a vendor that we had never seen before. And it turned out to be a sailing boat that the sales team had rented for about a month to take clients out on a sailboat. And then that's when I first started the relationship building, the aspect of, taking clients out and to earn trust and build relationships for business. That was my first foray into understanding that. So those are the two. Probably the parking ticket one is funnier.
Plus, with relationships, you learn that the best boat is your friend's boat.
Exactly. All great business can get done on a golf course, but I guess on a boat too.
Ed, this has been a blast. Thanks for taking us through your career and carving time to jam out with us.
CJ, it's been a blast. Thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.